A generous offer. Posted by u/credible333 over on r/HFY. The damage done by the First Interstellar War, as known to humanity, or the Human Squiddy War, to most sentients, or Conflict 81, to the Squiddy. The war was primarily due to humanity's unique ability. If this ability had been understood, the war may not have started, and the Dre would certainly not have switched sides to join the Squiddy. Xenobehavioralists had observed this ability in Earth's creatures, but had, falsely, assumed that sentients would be smart enough to abandon this deficiency. They explained the fact that all other sentients had been uplifted by a mysterious founder, and we clearly hadn't. They failed to understand that it's not a deficiency. It's simple math. We had, I admit, overextended ourselves, both in military terms and morally, when we tried to colonize LB-426. When the roaches, Squiddy. The Squiddy somewhat resembled Terran cockroaches, but were of course far larger than their Terran counterparts. When the Squiddy attacked, the party responsible lost power quickly. In fact, it was the fastest recall election in the United Pacific history. The Squiddy mistook our reluctance to fight a war for territory that wasn't ours under interstellar agreements for weakness. They reasoned that since we didn't defend LB-426, we wouldn't defend less valuable areas within human borders. They simultaneously attacked Jahim, Polis Massa, and Luminova. These three belonged to three different human nations: the UP, obviously, the New British Empire, and the United States. These three convinced other nations their colonies were next if something wasn't done. This was almost certainly not true. The Squiddy only took colonies that were more expensive to retake than they were worth. The Squiddy did the math, but not the type of math we were capable of. The push drive was the only militarily available FTL drive at the time. The speed and energy generation were inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the Patha generator. These were large installations that basically needed to be put on an industrialized planet. Your ship speed was determined by the proportion of your ship dedicated to the collector. The Patha factor score was determined by the power of the generator divided by the distance in parsecs from the generator. It wasn't impossible to win a battle with a disadvantageous Patha score, but it required far more tonnage, and even then it could quickly become a costly affair. For the Squiddy, this meant it wouldn't happen. Let's be clear, we absolutely thought taking back these three systems were critical. From intercepts, we knew they believed the entire human race was politically unified. This is still not true, but aliens are reluctant to believe it. We have had several fully fledged wars with each other. What will it take? But I digress. At this point, the roaches seemed to be determined to attack humanity, and we assumed they would keep taking stuff until we had nothing. One of the first moves we made was to guarantee the security of several dry colonies which seemed to be likely targets. This was done because humanity was in a better position to defend them than the dry confederacy. When we defended them, everyone seemed surprised, even though we thought we had specifically said we would defend these colonies. Most surprised were the roaches, who assumed we'd put up token resistance at best. They came in with max shielding, assuming that we'd also go max, and gradually wear each other down, and then run when each of our ship's shields drops to critical. Instead, we went in full blaze. Full power to guns, some engines, and almost no shields. Plus, that plus concentrated fire crippled one of their Tier 3 warships before they deduced we were serious. One of the few Terran tech advantages was our ability to concentrate heavy fire on one ship without beams interfering with each other's accuracy. Their commanders adapted remarkably well to this information, changing to a cloud wheel formation to deal with the concentrated fire and the inevitable missiles. Eventually they figured out we were fighting this fight to the last ship. Again, to them this was illogical, but they realized even if they won, many of them would die. The most politically secure of their captains informed us he was retreating and would take no further part in the battle. He assumed that meant he would not be targeted. The opposite was true. Every gun and a good quantity of the missiles were aimed at that ship. The Fortune, I believe. The rest of them were now afraid to retreat, seeing what happened. We had to transmit the obvious answer in clear instructions. If you all retreat at the same time, we can only get one of you. You see, it was a risky fight. We could not have devoted enough Tier 2s and 3s to overcome the slight power factor advantage they had. We wanted a victory, but it didn't have to be a crushing one. We didn't even bother sending the ships in that task force back for major repairs. We just patched them up as best as we could in system. We did the math. If the roaches had done the math, they would not have attacked every other Dray colony we protected, based on their understanding of cost-benefit ratios. We repelled them 4 times, and the other time inflicted so much damage they just left as soon as a reinforcement fleet arrived. With only 16 Tier 3s and 70 Tier 2s, we also got our first Tier 5 ship, and lots of supplies from the Dray. Unfortunately, that Tier 5 was obsolete. We also got the most lackadaisical ally we ever had. We had assumed they would be as committed as we were. A failure of math, based on some bad assumptions of universality. We fought harder than anyone expected, harder than made sense to those without the math skills. But the roaches made a critical breakthrough in weapons technology. They actually wanted to launch their war when it was developed, but casus belli came a little early. Seeing the tide turn, the Dray deserted us and made peace. That was acceptable. We didn't expect them to fight at a serious disadvantage. But then they made a critical mistake. The math error that cost them half their realm. They attacked us, stabbing us in the back. Between the two forces, we could not prevail, so we set up a peace conference. Even though the conference was with both powers, we insisted on detailing the settlements with each race in turn. We stressed that the offers they would get would be the most generous we will ever offer. Once they leave the table, the council had said in law that no settlement could be better than that offered today. The roaches got several significant systems, a generous annual war damages payment for 20 years, and a compensation for losing POW labor, i.e. ransom. The only thing we did get was that they would pay for transporting back their POWs. Technically, they agreed to not make a separate peace, but like all agreements among non-humans, it would only be honored while beneficial. For a refresher, here's the video of the offer to the Dray. You have talked for hours now, and there is no mention of what the Dray get. I insist I get a full proposal in half an hour or I am leaving and the war continues. I can give you my offer now. Nothing. Not even the cost of repatriating your POWs, which I would like you, Lord Admir, to pay personally. What is this? A joke? We are clearly winning. Do the math. Your allies will betray you, as all non-humans seem to do to each other. Now you may think that you can still win a war against us, because you haven't done the math. You think you have because you've tallied up the men and materials, compensated for our doctrinal advantages, etc. You have come to the conclusion that humanity would need to spend over 15% of its productive capacity for at least 4 years. What if I told you we are prepared to spend 30% of our production for 10 years? Lord Admir was shocked at how accurate the humans' knowledge of his government estimates were. He would have to send a message back home demanding how this knowledge got out. Don't be ridiculous. The resources we are fighting over don't justify anything like that. It would be a losing proposition. It's simple math. No, your math is simple and wrong. We do not know why, but every sentient species in the galaxy evolved without an essential behavioral tool. A way of ensuring cooperation that every other species thought was a flaw in humanity. However, the mathematical theory is called... I have no time for your games or theories. You are bluffing and I am leaving. Absolutely nothing. Final offer. Going once. Going twice. The door slammed shut as the roaches signed, and humanity was told the result. Many scientists across the galaxy called it classic human insanity, a result of our under-evolved minds. The few who had studied human culture recognized the offer. It was from old flat-screen media. Even fewer non-humans saw the significance, thinking it was only negotiator Davis being dramatic and vain. But even the humans who had never heard of the Godfather understood the offer. What he was really offering was relief from our vengeance, and he was hoping the offer would be rejected. So humanity set itself overwhelmingly to the single task. Make the Dre in general, and Lord Admir in particular, regret they ever met us. Defense budgets didn't go up to 30%. They went up to 40%, if you included the massive amount of research into alternative propulsion and ways of more efficiently providing a Patha field. The expenditure exceeded the probable benefits of regaining the systems from the Dre by an order of magnitude, or more. Fleet after fleet engaged the Dre, who refused to believe we would not soon fold. They dismissed the production estimates of their own intelligence services, concluding that because they agreed almost exactly with our stated production, they must be exaggerating. But they weren't. A weapon they did not expect was the Longship class, a Tier 4 vessel designed to fight at extremely low power ratings. Basically a receiver with a bunch of weapons and shields attached. About halfway between Tier 2 and 3. It wasn't something they had ever considered, such a large investment to a project with such small amounts of power. Since they could be countered with relatively cheap ships, they assumed they were a mistake. In actual fact, they were a testbed, as well as a way to get a small amount of force into every system, so the Dre have to put up some cheap defenses. The total cost of countering the Longship class was significantly more than the Longship class fleet cost to build. But what they were really doing was mapping. Locations, response times, sensor nets, shipping routes, all of it. Because spending 10% of an economy trying to solve a problem tends to mean the problem gets solved. And no, humans had no idea they were going to make the breakthroughs they made. Just that they'd make something that would win the war. The popular estimate was that a breakthrough would take 10 years. It actually took 8. A modification was made to the Patha generators to make them tightly directional, extending their range by about twice. Another was made to miniaturize the generator, allowing for a mothership to operate at full power independently and power dozens of tier 3s and a tier 4. In terms of bang for the buck, it was a miserable flotilla. In terms of how much damage it could do, deep in relatively undefended rear areas, it was a triumph. It must be stressed that only because we had the math did these things ever come into existence. They were researched by dozens of races before. But at any early stage, cost ruled them out, because again, you cannot do our math. The end result was 2 wars happening at once. On the front line, we were slightly losing, with losses being sustainable, but more than we'd like. The raiding in rear areas, however, was devastating any area it touched. We had carefully cultivated the idea that no more than 3 longships could ever raid a system, so there were few defenses, but nowhere near enough to face a mothership battle group. Repair facilities, strategic mines, food transport facilities, it all burned. Sometimes the objective was a significant part of the warfighting system. Other times we just hit a system at random, destroyed their defenses and left. You see, the longships were still lurking, and any system left without defenses would eventually be sacked. After a year of this, the Dre sued for peace. We gave them the terms we would accept, which were onerous to say the least. Basically, we wanted them to pay for the war and the interest on the loans to pay for it. Give up all disputed territories, or release their POWs, and would consider releasing theirs at some time in the future, if we felt like it. Oh, and Lord Admir's head. Rejection was quick, as it was unsurprising. Then we hit the fleets on the other Dre borders. This was intended to give intelligence on Dre defenses to hostile powers, and to give the new crews practice against less experienced opponents. It turned out one of their fleets had no maintenance for 3 months. There just wasn't the parts or transportation for anything not facing the human threat. The following message was sent. Fleet 5 has lost 100 ships. We are no longer capable of combat operations. At the meeting to discuss this, the commanders of Fleets 4 and 8 both stated their own fleets also lacked maintenance and would fare similarly against the Terran force. Every single fleet was either vital where it was, lacked basic equipment and supplies, or both. The defense chief claimed to have a solution that would enable a fleet to be sent to the border immediately. He then drew his traditional axe, cut off Lord Admir's head, and ordered the following message. Terms acceptable. Delivery of Point 4 via diplomatic ship commencing. So, was it worth it? Thousands of lives lost, a decade of economic development consumed, and a reputation for utter insanity. Yes, it was, because every deal made with a human nation is now guaranteed not by paper, but by the knowledge of what will do. If a human gives a guarantee, it's never ignored. If we tell someone not to attack someone else, they are safe, because they know we will enforce it, even if that costs us more than what we gain. For instance, we have 15 tier 3s guarding the border against you for the Tang. 15, and 5 of them are off duty at any time. That is enough to stop the mighty reformist navy from making a move, because you agreed not to. And you know what will happen to people who break agreements with us. The math I was talking about is called game theory, and it confirms the validity of certain behaviors that evolved on Earth. Specifically, the strategy called spite. You see, if you only punish someone when it doesn't cost you, then they can break agreements at any time. However, if you value people treating you right higher than whatever you actually lose by them treating you badly, then you can punish at any time. You can raise the price of betrayal high enough so that it rarely or never happens. And in the long run, being able to trust those you deal with, because of what they fear you'll do if they don't, brings great benefits. So, in the end, expensive actions to punish are cheaper if it establishes that bad actions are not worth it. So, about the news that your ships carry a new form of weapon, yes, I know about that. It doesn't alarm me. I don't think you'll use this new advantage to betray us, because we carry something far more powerful. We carry a grudge.